The mansion was unusually quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should, echoing off marble floors and expensive walls. Judge William Thompson had never returned home this early before. For a man whose days were dictated by hearings, rulings, and the hum of courtroom whispers, an unscheduled moment of peace felt like luxury. He smiled faintly as he stepped inside, holding 2 glossy Broadway tickets between his fingers. A surprise for Isabella, he thought. His little girl had begged to see the show for months. He imagined her joy, the way her blue eyes would light up, the way she would run to tell Victoria. But as he moved down the long corridor toward Isabella's room, that imagined laughter faded into something else. A sound reached him, soft broken sobs muffled against something or someone. William's steps slowed. The door to his daughter's room was slightly open. He pushed it gently, and the world stopped. There, on the carpet beneath the pale afternoon light, sat Grace Williams, the housekeeper. Her dark arms were wrapped around Isabella's trembling body. The child was curled against her, sobbing so hard her tiny shoulders shook. Grace rocked her slowly, humming something low under her breath, a melody so tender it felt out of place in that cold, luxurious room. For a moment, William didn't move. He simply stood there, framed by the doorway, the Broadway tickets fluttering slightly in his hand. His first thought wasn't fear, it was disbelief, confusion. Why is she holding my daughter like that? Grace? His voice came out quieter than intended, but sharp enough to make both figures freeze. Isabella stiffened in Grace's arms, then turned slightly, her face red and wet with tears. William noticed her shirt. It was wrinkled, pulled sideways at the collar, and on her back, just below the hem, were faint pinkish marks. Not scratches, not bruises, but marks that should not have been there. "What's going on here?" he asked, forcing steadiness into his tone. Grace looked up. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, filled with something that made him uneasy. Not guilt, not fear. Something heavier. Compassion mixed with sorrow. "Mr. Williams," she said softly. "Please. Just a moment." Her voice carried the kind of authority that didn't belong to a maid. She didn't rise immediately, didn't release Isabella. The girl clung tighter to her waist, burying her face in the woman's simple cotton blouse as if the world outside that embrace was unbearable. "Daddy," Isabella's voice cracked. "Please don't be mad." William's heart stuttered. He knelt, his judicial mask beginning to slip. "Sweetheart, why would I be mad?" Grace's hand stroked the girl's hair, her movements slow, careful. "It's all right, my little one," she whispered, and the tenderness in her voice sent a strange chill down William's spine. "No one will hurt you anymore. Anymore." The word hung in the air, heavy as a verdict. William felt the ground tilt beneath him. "What do you mean?" His voice dropped to a whisper, more plea than demand. Isabella's sobs deepened. "She said not to tell," the girl whimpered. Grace closed her eyes as though bracing herself. "Mr. William," she began, her voice low, steady. "We need to talk. Not later, now." For a man who had sent murderers to prison and faced the cold stares of guilty men, William Thompson had never felt true fear until that moment. His instincts told him this wasn't a misunderstanding. There was truth in Grace's calmness, a truth that frightened him far more than any lie could. He took a slow breath and looked again at his daughter. Her small hands clutched at Grace's dress. The trust in that gesture tore through him. It wasn't him she turned to for safety. It was her. The judge in him wanted to demand evidence, to interrogate, to restore order. But the father in him, the father he had almost forgotten how to be, saw something undeniable in his daughter's eyes, pain that had been waiting too long to be believed. Grace finally stood, still holding Isabella close. "Please, sir," she said softly. "Don't ask her anything right now. Let her breathe. Let her feel safe first." William nodded slowly, his throat tight. The tickets in his hand crumpled, forgotten. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the faint echo of Grace's words replayed again and again. "No one will hurt you anymore." He didn't know what that meant yet. But deep down, a terrible certainty began to bloom, one that told him his perfect life was about to come undone. The sun had sunk low, staining the marble halls of the Thompson estate with a warm, deceptive glow. The house looked peaceful, too peaceful for what was stirring inside it. Judge William Thompson sat in his leather chair by the window. Elbows on his knees, Broadway tickets now lying torn on the table beside him. He hadn't moved for nearly half an hour. His mind replayed the image he'd stumbled upon, Grace holding Isabella like a wounded bird, whispering words meant to heal something far beyond her reach. Now, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Upstairs, Isabella slept fitfully, exhausted from tears. Grace sat beside her, humming the same soft tune, while William waited below, the clock ticking loud enough to measure the tension in his chest. When Grace finally came down, she didn't enter timidly the way a housekeeper should have. She walked in with quiet resolve, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting across from him. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "Grace," William began. His tone clipped, formal, the way he spoke in court when control was slipping. "I need you to explain what I saw today. Why was my daughter crying like that? And what did you mean when you said no one would hurt her anymore?" Grace didn't flinch. "Because, sir," she said softly, "someone already has." William's eyes narrowed. "Are you implying that—" "I'm not implying anything," she interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm telling you what I've seen." He exhaled sharply. "You need to be careful with your words. You're making a very serious accusation." Grace looked at him steadily. "So is a child silent, sir?" That sentence hung between them, cold and final. William leaned back, folding his arms, his eyes scanning the ceiling like he was searching for the rational explanation he always clung to. "You're mistaken. Victoria loves Isabella. She's a doctor, for God's sake. She saves children's lives." Grace's voice softened. "And yet your daughter flinches when you say her name." That caught him. He froze. Grace continued quietly. "I've worked in this house long enough to know the difference between a spoiled child and a frightened one. Lately, Isabella's been neither. She's been broken." William rubbed a hand across his face. "You don't understand how serious this is. Victoria is—" "I understand perfectly," Grace said, her tone deepening. "Because I've seen it before." She looked down at her hands, fingers trembling slightly. "Years ago, when my sister's little boy started acting strange, crying for no reason, we thought it was just nerves. We were wrong. We didn't listen until it was too late." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the grandfather clock. "I promised myself," Grace whispered, "if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, I wouldn't stay quiet again." William's jaw tightened. His mind was at war with itself. The logical man versus the father who couldn't ignore the fear he'd seen in Isabella's eyes. "Grace," he said finally, voice low, almost pleading, "you're accusing my wife of hurting my daughter. Do you realize what that means?" Grace nodded slowly. "It means I'm trying to save her." He stood pacing, running his hand through his hair. "You could be wrong. Children bruise easily, they imagine things. Maybe Victoria's been strict lately. Maybe Isabella misinterpreted something." Grace's gaze sharpened. "You don't believe me?" "I believe my family," he said quickly, too quickly. "Then go upstairs," Grace said, standing now, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. "Look at her back. Look at her arms. And then tell me again who you believe." The words landed like a gavel. William turned toward the staircase but hesitated. He wanted to dismiss Grace's words as emotional nonsense, the overprotective instinct of a woman who'd seen too much tragedy. But then he remembered Isabella's trembling voice, the way she'd clung to Grace like she was the only safe thing in the world. He looked back at Grace, who stood perfectly still, eyes wet, but fierce. "You have no idea what kind of accusation this is," he said again, weaker this time. Grace's reply came quietly, cutting through him like truth itself. "And you have no idea what kind of pain that child is hiding." Upstairs, a faint sound echoed through the ceiling, a small whimper, followed by a soft rustle. Isabella, even in her sleep, was crying. That sound broke something in him. William turned toward the staircase and began to climb, each step heavier than the last. He didn't want to believe Grace, but deep inside, a small, treacherous voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he should have been home earlier, long before this moment. And as he reached Isabella's door, the last light of sunset flickered against the wall, painting the mansion in a deceptive glow of peace, a peace built on silence. The night passed like a long interrogation, silent, relentless. every hour pulling at William Thompson's certainty. By morning, he felt like a stranger in his own house. The coffee he brewed went untouched. The air was heavy with something unseen, something that had been there all along but that he had never wanted to name. When he finally walked down the hallway to Isabella's room, Grace was already there, folding a blanket at the edge of the bed. The child still slept, curled up tight, her face half hidden in the pillow. The faintest bruise, like a thumbprint, peeked from beneath her sleeve. William stopped at the door, one hand on the frame. "Grace," he said quietly, "I looked. You were right." Grace's eyes lifted to his, calm but tired. "I know, sir." He took a deep breath, as if speaking might break something fragile. "They look like marks. But how could I have missed this?" Grace didn't answer. She only looked at him with a sadness that was almost pity. Sometimes when you love someone, you don't see what you don't want to. William's throat tightened. He turned away, gazing out the window where the city shimmered below like a painting of order and wealth. Everything he had built, everything he believed about himself, all of it was built on the idea that truth could be controlled, examined, proven. But now the truth was a bruise on his daughter's skin. "Tell me," he said finally, "how long has this been happening?" Grace hesitated. "I can't say for sure, but the signs have been there for months." Her words came slow, measured. She described small things. Isabella's sudden flinches, her loss of appetite, her fear of being left alone with her stepmother. The story spilled like quiet confessions. Toys broken and blamed on the child, harsh punishments for tiny mistakes, medicine given without explanation. Each detail cut deeper. William wanted to interrupt, to defend Victoria, to say she was kind, brilliant, incapable of such cruelty, but his voice refused to move. Grace's every word fit too neatly with what he had ignored. Isabella's shrinking laughter, the way she had stopped meeting his eyes, the forced smiles at dinner when Victoria's hand rested too tightly on her shoulder. "I thought she was just shy," he murmured, more to himself than to Grace. "She used to be," Grace said softly, "but now she's afraid." The words landed like judgment. William pressed a hand against his forehead. "Victoria wouldn't. She couldn't." Grace stepped closer. "Sir, evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it wears pearls and a white coat." He stared at her. This woman he'd thought of merely as help, now speaking to him with the calm certainty of a witness on the stand. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. "I tried," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But every time I started, you told me you were busy. That Victoria knew best." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He remembered the time she had lingered near his study door, the way she had looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. He had waved her off, too focused on his cases, his reputation, his courtroom victories. Grace's voice softened. "You wanted to believe your home was perfect. I understand that. But perfection can be the most dangerous disguise." A door closed somewhere downstairs. Victoria's heels clicked against the marble floor. Confident, rhythmic, perfectly timed. The sound made Isabella stir in her sleep. Her small hand gripped the blanket, trembling even in dreams. William froze. Grace glanced toward the sound, her jaw tightening. "She's home." William swallowed hard. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, what he could do. Part of him wanted to march downstairs, demand answers, demand truth. But another part, the father in him, wanted to grab his daughter and run. Grace touched his arm gently, grounding him. "Don't rush. You need to be sure. You're a man who deals in proof. Let me help you find it." He met her gaze, searching for any hint of deceit, but found only quiet determination. "Proof?" he repeated. Grace nodded. "I've already started collecting it." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I've taken pictures, notes, recordings. Things no one would believe without seeing." William stared at her, a mix of shock and gratitude swirling inside him. You risked your job doing that." Grace smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "I risked something worse once, my silence." Downstairs, Victoria called out cheerfully, her voice echoing through the house. "Darling, are you home? I have wonderful news from the hospital." William didn't answer. His pulse hammered in his chest. Grace turned toward the door, her voice low but firm. "Be careful, sir. She's smart. She knows how to make people believe her, but the truth always leaves a trail." He looked back at his sleeping daughter, then toward the stairs where Victoria's voice floated like a melody just slightly off-key. The air between those two worlds, innocence and deception, felt like glass about to shatter. And for the first time, Judge William Thompson realized he wasn't standing in his home anymore. He was standing at the edge of a crime scene. That evening, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with perfume and tension, the scent of something beautiful trying to hide something rotten underneath. From downstairs came the faint sound of classical music. Victoria always insisted that Chopin made a home feel civilized, but the melody only made the silence heavier. William lingered outside his study, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. His reflection in the tall window looked unfamiliar. Eyes hollow, jaw tight, shoulders hunched beneath invisible weight. He could hear her moving about below, the click of heels, the soft rhythm of her humming, the clinking of a wine glass being set down. The house felt staged, like a courtroom just before the verdict. When Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs, she looked radiant. Her white coat was still draped over one arm, her smile warm, practiced. "Darling," she said lightly, "you're home early again. Twice in 2 days. Should I be worried you've fallen ill?" William didn't answer. He watched her set her bag on the console table, watched the way she straightened a vase that didn't need straightening. Everything about her was perfect, her posture, her smile, her tone. It should have comforted him. Instead, it made his stomach turn. "Where's Isabella?" she asked, slipping out of her heels. "She's asleep," he said. His voice was low even, but the words carried a sharpness that made her pause. "Oh?" She smiled again, but it faltered slightly. "That's odd. She usually waits up to see me." "She was tired," he said flatly. "A long day." Victoria tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. "Is something wrong, Will?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The courtroom in his head, his refuge, had gone silent. No arguments, no rulings, just a quiet, aching dread. Grace stepped out of the hallway then, wiping her hands on a towel. "Good evening, Dr. Thompson." Victoria's smile sharpened. "Grace, still here?" "Yes, ma'am." "Isabella needed me. She needed you?" Victoria's voice was light, but her eyes flashed something colder. "That's sweet. But she has a mother, doesn't she?" Grace didn't flinch. "She has people who love her." The air between them stiffened. William could feel the battle lines forming. Invisible but deadly. He wanted to step in, to end the tension, but some part of him wanted to see it play out. To see if Grace's quiet certainty could make the mask crack. Victoria laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I don't know what stories you've been filling my husband's head with, but I do hope you remember your place, Grace." "My place," Grace repeated. Her tone was calm, but her eyes didn't waver. "My place is beside that little girl when she's scared to breathe." William saw it then, the faint twitch at the corner of Victoria's mouth. Not fear, not guilt, but irritation. It was subtle, the kind of reaction most people would miss, but to a judge trained to read lies, it was enough. "I think you should go home now," Victoria said crisply. Grace didn't move. "I will, but not yet." The smile on Victoria's face froze. "Excuse me?" "I said not yet." Grace folded the towel neatly and placed it on the counter. "Isabella's resting, but she shouldn't be alone tonight." Victoria's voice dropped an octave. "Grace, this is not your decision." "No," Grace said softly. "It's yours, ma'am. Every bruise, every tear, every bottle in her drawer. You decided all that." The words hit like a slap. William's heart pounded so loudly, he could hear it echoing in his ears. Victoria's eyes went wide, then narrowed into a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "What did you just say?" Grace's voice didn't shake. "I said that little girl is scared of you, and I'm done pretending not to see why." The silence that followed was unbearable. For a second, William thought Victoria might actually strike her, but instead she laughed, a cold, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You've lost your mind," she hissed. "You think I'd hurt my own stepdaughter? You think he'll believe you?" She turned to William, her smile returning, pleading this time. "Will, darling, you can't possibly, so I'm stop," he said quietly. The single word froze her mid-step. Victoria blinked, her composure wavering. "Stop, what are you talking about?" "I said stop." His voice rose just enough to echo. "Enough pretending, Victoria. Enough stories." Grace stood silent beside the wall, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes glistening but steady. Victoria turned her attention to her husband again. her tone sugar-sweet. "Will, listen to me. Grace has been acting strange lately. I think she's projecting. You know how people in her position can become attached?" William slammed his hand against the sideboard, the sound reverberating through the hall. "Do not finish that sentence," her face blanched. "Every day I've defended the innocent," he said, voice shaking. "Every day I've looked men in the eye and sworn I could tell truth from deceit. And yet in my own house." He stopped, swallowing hard. "You've made me blind." For a moment, Victoria's perfect mask cracked completely. Something raw and ugly flickered in her eyes. Panic, anger, maybe both. Then just as quickly it was gone. She smoothed her hair, straightened her coat, and said with chilling calm, "You have no idea what you're talking about." Grace exhaled softly, as if she had expected that answer all along. And as the last note of Chopin drifted through the air, William realized the music wasn't calming him anymore. It was mocking him. The truth was here now, standing in his living room, and it had the face of a woman he no longer recognized. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low over the world, demanding silence. William sat in his car outside the courthouse, but he didn't go in. The marble steps, the grand pillars, the place that once felt like his sanctuary, now felt like a mockery. He had sentenced men for less than what was happening in his own home. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel. Every image from last night replayed behind his eyes. Grace's trembling yet resolute voice, Victoria's cold laughter, Isabella's silent tears. The bourbon he'd used to calm his nerves had done nothing but deepen the ache in his chest. When his phone buzzed, he flinched. "It was Grace, Mr. Williams," she said softly. "She's home." He sat up straight. "Victoria?" "Yes, she's with Isabella now." A sharp panic cut through his chest. "Where?" "In her room." Grace's tone remained steady, but there was a current of fear underneath. "I'm outside the door. I didn't want to interrupt until you got here." "I'm coming," he said, starting the engine. "Don't let her near the child." "I won't," she whispered. The drive home took 12 minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his hands were slick with sweat. The mansion loomed against the sky, pale and silent like a ghost of its former self. He pushed the front door open and froze. From upstairs came a soft, sing-song voice. Victoria's voice. "It's all right, my darling. Mommy's here now. You don't have to cry anymore." The sound of it twisted something deep inside him. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Grace stood at the end of the hallway, her back straight, her jaw clenched. "She told me to leave," she whispered as he approached. "Said she needed to comfort Isabella." Without a word, William pushed open the bedroom door. The sight inside made his stomach drop. Victoria sat on the edge of Isabella's bed, brushing the girl's hair with a wide, fixed smile. Isabella's tiny shoulders were rigid, her hands gripping the bedsheet like she was holding on to the earth itself. "Victoria," he said. She turned, still smiling. "Oh, honey, you scared me." "Isabella just had a little nightmare. I was calming her down." Isabella looked up, her eyes red and wide. William saw it in that silent plea. The kind of look that didn't come from nightmares, but from years of fear. "Sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You okay?" The girl swallowed hard, then nodded too quickly. "I'm fine, Daddy." Victoria's hand landed on the child's shoulder, too possessive, too practiced. "Of course she's fine," she said sweetly. "Aren't you, sweetheart?" The tone was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. William looked at Grace, who hovered in the doorway like a quiet sentinel. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, urging him to see what was right in front of him. "Grace," Victoria said suddenly, her voice dripping with disdain. "Would you mind giving us some privacy? You've done quite enough interfering for 1 week." Grace didn't move. "I'll stay." "You'll do as I say," Victoria snapped, standing. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, her face twisting with irritation before she forced it back into its usual serene shape. "No," William said, his voice calm but final. "She'll stay." Victoria blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I said," he repeated, standing now, his voice rising like a tide. "She'll stay." A fragile silence fell over the room. Then very quietly, Isabella whispered, "Daddy, please don't let her hurt Grace." The words cracked the air open. Victoria froze, her expression shattering. "What did you say?" she hissed. William stepped between them. Don't you dare, he warned. Victoria's eyes darted between them, calculating, desperate. You're letting a maid manipulate you. She's turning you against me, against our family. Grace took a step forward. You don't get to use that word like a weapon, she said evenly. And you don't get to call this a family. Not when you've spent months breaking that child apart. Shut up, Victoria screamed. Her voice no longer refined, her composure gone. She lunged toward Grace, but William caught her wrist mid-air. For a second they locked eyes, judge and doctor, husband and wife, truth and deception. And in that moment, he saw her for what she truly was, and not a caregiver, not a healer, but a woman who needed control more than she needed love. Get out, he said through clenched teeth. Victoria yanked free. You'll regret this, she hissed. Both of you? No, Grace said softly, stepping forward. You're the only one who will. Victoria glared at her, then at William before storming out of the room. Her heels struck the hardwood like gunshots until the sound disappeared down the stairs. Isabella collapsed into Grace's arms, sobbing. William stood there, motionless, his pulse hammering in his ears. The walls around him, the walls that had once been filled with laughter, the walls he'd thought protected his family, now felt like the walls of a courtroom. Except this time, he wasn't the judge. He was the man who'd finally seen the evidence too late, and he knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the next confrontation wouldn't be just a conversation. It would be a reckoning. The storm came that night, rolling thunder that rattled the windows and painted the mansion in flashes of white and shadow. Grace sat awake in the kitchen, a cup of untouched tea cooling between her palms. Every creak of the house felt like a warning. She had locked Isabella's door herself, checked every window twice, and still her chest was tight with dread. Upstairs, William paced. The judge who'd once commanded entire courtrooms now found himself terrified of the silence inside his own home. His reflection in the darkened glass looked older, his eyes sunken, his face drawn. Every part of him screamed to fix it, to protect, to act, but his mind was clouded by guilt and disbelief. At midnight, a soft sound broke the stillness. Footsteps. Grace's head snapped up. She knew those footsteps, measured, deliberate. Victoria. The woman appeared at the top of the stairs, barefoot, her silk robe tied neatly as if this were any other night. Still awake, Grace? She asked, voice smooth as glass. Grace stood. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I, Victoria replied, gliding down the steps. It's hard to rest when people conspire in your own home. Grace said nothing. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. Victoria smiled faintly. You've been very busy lately, haven't you? Whispering in my husband's ear. Filling that child's head with stories. She told me what happened, Grace said softly. I just listened. Listened, Victoria repeated, laughing under her breath. That's what they all say before they ruin a life. She took a slow step closer. Do you know what it's like to work your whole life for respect only to have a maid? I'm not your maid right now, Grace interrupted, her voice cutting clean through the air. Right now I'm the only thing standing between you and that little girl. Victoria's smile faltered. For the first time, her mask cracked in full light. The softness in her features hardened into something cruel, something feral. You think you can protect her from me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Grace didn't back down. You've heard her for the last time. Victoria's eyes flicked toward the hallway. Where's William? Grace didn't answer, and that silence told her everything. Upstairs, Victoria guessed, her lips curling. Drinking, no doubt. He always was good at pretending problems go away when he ignores them. She started to move past Grace, but the older woman stepped in her path. Don't, she said. Move, Victoria ordered, her tone low and dangerous. Grace didn't. Not this time. The thunder cracked outside, rattling the walls. Victoria's breath quickened. You think you can stop me? I don't think, Grace said, her eyes blazing with quiet certainty. I know. Before Victoria could answer, another voice spoke from the shadows of the hallway. So do I. William emerged from the darkness. He'd been there the whole time, watching. In his hand, he held a small black device, Grace's phone, its red light blinking. I heard everything, he said evenly. For the first time since he'd known her, Victoria was speechless. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. William stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You've been lying to me for months. You've been lying to everyone. But not anymore. Victoria's composure shattered completely. You can't prove anything, she hissed. You're drunk and she's a nobody. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, a respected doctor, or your cleaning woman? Neither, William said, his voice trembling with rage. They'll believe the evidence. He turned the phone toward her. On the screen, a series of recorded clips played. Victoria mixing medication into a juice bottle, scolding Isabella, whispering threats in the dark, every sound, every image damning. Her knees buckled. You recorded me? Grace's voice was soft but unyielding. I did. I couldn't let her keep hurting that child. William's hands shook as he scrolled through the footage. How long have you been doing this? 3 months, Grace said quietly. Since I first saw the bruises. Victoria's face twisted, half fury, half disbelief. You don't understand, I was helping her. No, William said, his voice breaking. You were destroying her. He turned away, his breath ragged, his shoulders shaking. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows. Then faintly a small voice drifted from the stairs. Daddy? Isabella stood there in her pajamas, her stuffed bear in hand, eyes wide with fear. Grace rushed to her, crouching down. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered, wrapping an arm around her. You're safe now. Victoria took a step forward, desperate. Isabella. William's voice cut through the air like thunder. Don't you dare. Victoria froze. He looked at her one last time. You're done. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue of police lights illuminated the rain outside. Officers entered the home quietly but firmly. Victoria didn't resist as they handcuffed her. She simply stared blankly at the floor, her perfect world collapsing in silence. As they led her out, Grace stood beside Isabella, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. When the door closed behind them, the house finally exhaled. William sank into a chair, his face in his hands. God forgive me, he whispered. Grace looked at him, her voice gentle but resolute. Forgive yourself by doing what's right from now on. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Upstairs, the storm began to fade. The rain softened, and somewhere in the distance, dawn broke through the clouds. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Not with fear, but with peace. And as Grace tucked Isabella into bed and watched the girl drift into sleep, she whispered to herself, This time I didn't stay silent. The next morning arrived soft and pale, as if the world itself was exhausted from the storm. The mansion, once echoing with tension and deceit, now stood in solemn silence. Dust motes drifted through golden shafts of light spilling from the tall windows. Everything looked the same marble floors, same paintings, same polished wood, but it felt different. For the first time, truth had air to breathe. William sat on the back porch, still in last night's clothes, the weight of sleepless hours pulling at his eyes. His robe hung loosely. His once proud posture slouched, a man stripped of illusion. The morning paper lay open on the table, its front page a haunting reflection of his life. Respected doctor arrested in child endangerment case. Judge Thompson's family at center of scandal. He didn't read beyond the headline. He couldn't. The sound of small footsteps drew his attention. Isabella stood in the doorway, clutching her bear, her hair a wild tangle of curls. She hesitated, then padded toward him. Daddy? He turned, forcing a gentle smile. Hey, sweetheart. She climbed into his lap without a word and leaned her head against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, small, quick, fragile, and it broke something inside him. Is she gone? Isabella asked softly. William swallowed hard. Yes, baby. She's gone. Is she in trouble? He nodded slowly. She is. But it's not your fault. You hear me? He cupped her face gently, eyes wet. None of it is your fault. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered. Grace said angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have kind hands. William closed his eyes. She's right. The screen door creaked open behind them. Grace stepped out quietly, dressed in her simple uniform, her hair tied back neatly. Her eyes, though tired, held that same calm strength that had carried them all through the night. I made breakfast, she said softly. If you're up for it. William nodded. Thank you, Grace. Isabella turned and smiled faintly. Can we have pancakes? Grace's lips curved into a smile. Of course we can, baby. Extra syrup, just how you like them. As she turned to go back inside, William's voice stopped her. Grace? She paused, glancing back. He stood, holding Isabella's small hand in his, the morning light outlining them both. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You saved her." "You saved us." Grace shook her head. "I just did what needed to be done." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You did more than that. You did what I should have done a long time ago." Grace looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then said quietly, "The hardest truth to face is the one that lives under your own roof." William nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep. For a while, none of them spoke. The morning air carried the scent of wet grass and maple syrup from the kitchen. The storm had left the garden glistening. Raindrops clung to the roses like tiny crystals. Grace finally broke the silence. "The police asked if I'd testify." I said yes. William met her gaze, steady and grateful. "I'll stand beside you," she smiled faintly. "You already are." As she turned to go inside, Isabella tugged on her father's hand. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Can Grace live with us now?" The question hit him like sunlight after months of darkness. He looked toward Grace's silhouette in the doorway, then back at his daughter. "I think," he said softly. "Grace already lives here in the ways that matter." Isabella smiled, satisfied, and ran inside after her. William stayed where he was, watching the horizon burn slowly into gold. The sound of laughter, soft, fragile, healing, floated through the house. For the first time in years, it didn't sound forced. He sank into the porch chair, a deep breath escaping him. The house no longer felt like a courtroom, no longer a prison of appearances and expectations. It felt human again. The judge had learned what no verdict could teach him, that justice isn't only found in the law. Sometimes it's found in a woman's courage, a child's trust, and the moment a man finally chooses truth over pride. As the sun climbed higher, William closed his eyes, the warmth washing over him. Inside, Grace and Isabella laughed over burnt pancakes and spilled syrup. And for the first time in his life, the sound of imperfection was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard.